The U.S. political right last week got wrapped into a debate over anti-Semitism in the wake of the Heritage Foundation's handling of a Tucker Carlson-Nick Fuentes interview. It was a glimpse of some of the tension that exists in this new coalition under Donald Trump and raises questions about where the conservative movement is headed in Trump's final years and post years of the Trump presidency.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel. And this week, joining me to talk about that intriguing future is Tim Chapman, the president of Advancing American Freedom, a public policy organization dedicated to advancing the conservative movement. Tim, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Hey, Kim, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, before we talk about the future, let's talk a little bit about what we saw last week. And just to remind our listeners of this flap, Tucker Carlson, former Fox News host, now out with his own provocative platform, invited Nick Fuentes, an avowed anti-Semite, a racist, Hitler and Stalin admirer, on his show and gave him a somewhat unchallenged platform. Heritage President Kevin Roberts stepped in to defend Tucker's interview, accusing critics of engaging in cancel culture and suggesting a venomous coalition was sowing division by going after him. Yeah. This caused some backlash at Heritage, and since then his chief of staff has been dumped. Members of Heritage's anti-Semitism task force have resigned. Roberts has now said he made a mistake. I want to unpack some of this, but first I want to ask you, you were at Heritage. You were the co-founder of Heritage Action. It's advocacy arm. You were there for a decade. I have to say that I wasn't necessarily surprised Heritage got a little wrapped up in this, because to me, it's kind of become a fascinating example of this longstanding free market liberty institution that's nonetheless lately been working very hard to notch points with this sort of new right, populist, national conservative right. And it ended up in this scenario as a result. Were you surprised when you saw this?
Sadly, Kim, I was not surprised.
Okay.
I really do wish I was, but we had been watching Heritage for a while, and we've seen a lot of these things coming. I remember, there have been so many times that Heritage has sort of gestured towards the new right over the last 3 years. I mean, I remember early on during when Ukraine was invaded by Putin, how the Heritage Foundation got it right off the bat. And they flew the Ukrainian flag over the organization, and they said, we're going to stand against this authoritarian regime. That flag came down a few weeks later because they were taking a lot of heat from Tucker and from the more populist side of the movement. That was the first time that those of us on the outside who were rooting for Heritage and who were friends of Heritage started to think, okay, well, what's going on here? And then you started to see over the course of the last few years, which you just alluded to, lots of different policy positions either being downplayed or whispered about or outright completely canceled. So you started to see old Heritage papers on tariffs and the importance of free trade, and those papers were disappearing. Or where you would see Heritage might maybe, have a disagreement with the administration, you would see that disagreement expressed in the quietest terms possible. And that to us on the outside just really started to make a lot of people worried that the flagship institution of the conservative movement, which has been the backbone of the conservative movement for 50 years in many ways, was beginning to try to court the new right. And look, if I give them the benefit of the doubt, or at least the most charitable interpretation, I think that what you could say is they see the energy of the new right, and they want to kind of jump out there and co-opt that energy and wrangle it towards better and more principled ends, which would be an admirable goal, I think. But at some point, while you're trying to bring those people into the fold, you actually have to teach them what the principles of conservatism are. And that's what I'm not seeing. And that's the thing that really concerns a lot of us. And we just think Heritage can be so much better.
Well, let's talk about that, about wrangling them into the fold and saying what needs to be said. And as funny as some of this is rolled out, the one thing that I think many leaders, and it's been good to see, have come out and everyone agrees on, everyone can condemn Nick Fuentes. Okay. But to me, that ought to be a given. This really is
Yeah.
an unpleasant individual. It strikes me the bigger question, and this is where Kevin Roberts got himself sideways a bit, was Tucker Carlson.
Right.
This notion that criticizing Tucker Carlson equates to cancel culture, to me, is nonsense. Cancel culture is an effort to destroy someone's life and livelihood, usually for committing some minor transgression of progressive orthodoxy. Tucker had no obligation to give a platform to a professional bigot. Even if you agree that he could and had a right to do so, I think Roberts' failure was in failing to criticize Tucker for a softball interview, for failing to push back in any way. Basically, Tucker put a stamp of approval on this guy, and then Heritage put a stamp of approval on Tucker.
Right.
I guess, in your mind, what was the actual failure here on whether on Tucker's part or Heritage's part?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think Tucker is the big issue. Tucker is the gateway drug to Nick Fuentes. That's the
Mm-hmm.
problem. And so many of us have seen that so clearly. If you just watch what he platforms consistently on his show, he's always just asking questions, or he's always just, saying, oh, this is an interesting theory, but he never pushes back. And so a lot of us who have seen this happen are wondering why it's so hard for Heritage to push back. I think the reason why is because, again, earlier on, they've made a decision. They've acknowledged they made a decision to go and invest heavily in Tucker's show. I think they've invested more than $1 million in Tucker's show. They need that audience. They want that audience to move in their direction. But again, if you get that audience moving in your direction, you have to lay out the clear lines, and they just aren't doing that right now. So I think that you're totally right in pointing out that Fuentes is not the issue here. Tucker is the issue here. And if we don't find a way to draw real lines in the sand here, where will we? And the last thing I would say there, Kim, you alluded to it. I think it's really important. There is something entirely encouraging about this incident, which is that so many voices on the right have been concerned about what happened. It's crazy that this is all happening at Heritage. In some ways, it's entirely fitting that this is all happening at Heritage, because Heritage has been the epicenter of the movement for so long. But the fact that it's happening at Heritage, and maybe something wonderful comes out of this. And what is wonderful would be a unanimous condemnation of what we're seeing from the Tucker and the Fuentes wing of the party. I mean, if you look at what's happening right now about people who are coming out and condemning this, you have people on the traditional Reagan side of the party that are forcefully condemning it. But you also have people on the NatCon right. I mean, Orrin Cass, who runs American Compass, came out with a wonderful piece yesterday talking about how this kind of behavior will ultimately be what dooms the right. So that is a very encouraging sign.
Well, right, given that is a little bit more of a new right voice speaking.
Yes, that's
there.
right. Yes. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, though. Just, you're out there, you're on the ground, you talk to a lot of people. Look, we're talking right now about the new right. And what we're seeing here is a sort of growing divide in the conservative movement. And the wider split has to do with the rise of whatever you want to call them, the new right, national conservative movement, America Firsters. Some people say the populist wing.
Right.
It's all a bit amorphous. There's a policy side of this, which is a free market, free person advocate. I view with a little alarm, because it sounds a lot more Bernie Sanders than Ronald Reagan. It's national industrial policy. It's anti-corporate, banging on about big pharma and capitalists. It's more subsidies to people. It's very anti-free trade, anti-American foreign engagement. I think far more than Donald Trump is in any way. It's get rid of right to work in the states, break bread with the unions. But there's also this cultural side. And partly, I think there's a lot of people that there's just a normal reaction to progressive overreach like DEI and trans. But there's this fringe too that goes much further: white nationalism, anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, a lot of conspiracy theories. That uglier side, how big do you really think that group is, and how worrisome is that they are being featured by folks like Tucker Carlson? Like, are they really an element, or are they a small thing? I'm trying to get a sense.
Look, I don't run into that anywhere I go. I really don't think it's as big as the Tucker wing wants to say it is. In many ways, this is an online phenomenon for the most part. right? It's an online phenomenon. And the entire world that the Tucker wing or that even sometimes Heritage gets itself involved in is being too online. And if you look at what's happening on X, X is kind of a right wing echo chamber. They're all stripes of conservatives on X right now.
Hmm.
But the ones that the algorithm boosts the most are the ones that are the loudest and the most fringy. Okay. And so I think they're taking a lot of feedback from online, and I don't think it translates into electoral votes. I think we even saw that a little bit last week when you saw pushback at the polls, and you saw actually a massive swing amongst young voters, which we are now being told by the Tucker
Yeah.
Carlsons of the world. We have to follow where the young voters are. We have to follow where the young men are and where the young energy is. Well, you saw young men break a different direction in the last election, and you're seeing young men in polls for 2028 breaking more for Gavin Newsom than JD Vance. And so I just think this is all a little bit confusing for people who spend too much time online. And I just don't think it's there right now. I think we're actually, potentially running up against the end of what could be the most powerful part of the populist new right. If you look
Hmm.
at everything that they've been pushing for this early part, this first year of the Trump administration, you alluded to it earlier. You have a lot of tariffs. You have this new FDR style 50-year, mortgage. You have price controls on drugs. You have, the president encouraging the Department of Justice to go out there and, investigate the meat packers. And you have the state capitalism component of what they're doing, which is try to take stakes in private sector enterprises. None of it's really working. And so, to the extent that it doesn't work, and we still have inflation that's holding pretty steady, and we still have wages that aren't growing fast enough, and the economy still feels tight for your average American, the people that you think are represented by this online new right are going to swing to the left. And it'll vanish very quickly.
Well, I hope that that is the direction we go. I like that optimism. And I do want to talk about that future in a minute, but just one more question on this constituency that is out there. What do you think is actually driving it? I heard you on another recent interview, and you were
Yeah.
sort of talking about young men in grievance politics.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, I've said I watched the Tucker and Nick, interview, and I thought it was just so striking how much they both were animated by grievance politics in that interview. If you watch the first 30 minutes in particular, they were both recounting stories of people who had slighted them in the conservative movement, and it was very grievance politics animated. But then if we zoom out a little bit, look, I've got teenagers at home. Many of us have teenagers at home. And I kind of understand what's happening, especially to young men. I think there's a lot of a
Hmm.
pushback against the cancel culture that the left has,
Sure.
deployed for the last decade. It's been it's vastly overreached, and it's told white young men in particular that they don't have a place, but young men
Right.
all across the board that they don't have a place. And so I understand that reaction to push back. Now, the thing is, and this is why I get back into, being critical of my friends over at the Heritage Foundation. I mean, you need to, if you're going to try to co-opt those young men, you need to tell them the truth about their situation. And the truth about their situation is not that they have no agency and that they are victims and that they just have to, align themselves with the movement that will reward them at the expense of the other people in this country.
Sure.
And that is what I don't see happening right now on the right. I keep saying I want Jordan Peterson from 6 years ago back, and I want
Yeah.
like five more of him. And the thing about Jordan Peterson 6 years ago, and he still is like this, but I want him to have a bigger platform, is he's telling young men to make their bed. Okay. And here's the last thing I'll say on this. There's this notion, especially on the right, that the boomers, the Jordan Petersons of the world, or the people in their 40s or their 50s don't know what time it is. Okay. Those are the people that those young men need. Okay. Those are the people that have the life lessons and the wisdom and the experience necessary to say, I get why you feel the way you feel, but let me tell you how this really works. Okay. And encourage them to use their own agency to work forward in their lives. And as they grow up and become men and functioning, members of society, that's a better thing for all of us. But you got to do that by encouraging them to their better angels.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Last week, and I was writing about the aftermath of this thumping that Republicans got in this election. Last week, I said,
Right.
you know, you want to know what time it is? It's time for the GOP to see a big wake up call here,
Yeah.
and think about what direction it's going. Because some of these ideas and grand plans for how we remake the party are already showing that they don't really work. Let's talk a little bit about that future, though.
Yeah.
There are, and you mentioned a name here, there are some really prominent people in the Trump administration that very much center themselves in this NatCon realm,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to the policy front. You know, I'm
Yeah.
not suggesting these guys buy into the anti-Semitism or
Right.
anything, but
Yep.
JD Vance, Marco Rubio, and you see that tug of war inside the administration. You mentioned some of the policies that they've won the day on. I would throw another one out there. It really disappointed me because I think it plays into some of the, you know, the lack of economic progress we're seeing. But the Republicans invested all this time in their one big beautiful bill. One of the greatest things they could have done
Yeah.
to spur the economy, for instance, was maybe to bring down marginal rates for everyone.
Yes.
That didn't happen in part because the NatCons argued we can't give any tax breaks to wealthy people and
Right.
millionaires. So,
Yeah.
you know, they won that one as well, too. Some of these folks have been very close to Tucker Carlson. They very much, you know, put themselves in this NatCon movement. What choices do they face going forward? What future do you see coming for the party?
I think they're going to need to distance themselves from the Tucker wing of the party. I think Tuckerism and where it leads, like I said earlier, he's the gateway drug to a lot of these bad ideologies. I think that leads to electoral defeat. And again, I said, I don't think their policies are working right now. If we didn't have the tax bill that you just mentioned, it'd be way worse than it is right now. The
Yeah.
tax bill was the only conservative, economic policy that they've adopted so far. And we need to see more of that kind of stuff. That's why I actually have hope for the debate on the right now. I think at the end of the day, how policy actually works is an empirical question. We are going to be able to find out if across the board tariffs work. We are going to be able to find out if price controls work. We're going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to find out if state capitalism works or not. And I think at the end of the day, you're going to see the results of that. And there will need to be attacking back by the time we get to 2028. No matter who the candidate is, the nominee is in 2028, that candidate, if they want to have a chance to win, will actually have to address some of the issues and the failures of this first year of this term.
What they also have to, though, and I think this is the warning signal for me when I think about the future. You know, usually when people are drawn to new ideas, even bad new ideas, it's
Hmm.
because they've lost some faith that the old ones work.
Right.
And, you know, I think from a policy perspective, this is something that does worry me. And I think everyone needs to keep in mind is it hasn't just been in the first part of this administration, some policies that we know from history are really problematic and are not going to yield that
Yeah.
growth and prosperity we want. We know that lower taxes and deregulation and limited government work, but we've had a GOP in recent years. It's not just that they've gone down this
Yes.
other path, but they have not
Yes.
really followed their own promises, right? I mean, no
Yes.
one's doing anything about spending. You know, we're not necessarily, as you said, going as far as we might do to implement some economic policies that are going to actually help. How big of a risk is it that the party instead just slides toward what we've seen more of saying, well, we're just going to throw out any policy that we think can win some voters over to us, you know, no taxes on tips
Yeah.
or whatever it
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
rather than the hard work of implementing policy that works.
It's a huge risk, but it's exactly why we are where we are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire reason that the second Trump term has gone in the direction that it's gone has been because of the failure of Republican leadership for decades. And that's an indictment on all of us in many ways. I mean, we've all got to do better. But I remember growing up through, through Republican politics in the early 2000s and the 2010s. Very much remember the 2008 financial crisis. I very much remember the 2010 Tea Party wave, which was a repudiation of that and a repudiation of Obamacare. It was also a reaction to the failure of the Bush era Republicans to get federal spending under control. all of this was a reaction to Republicans failing to deliver on what they said they could and should deliver. So look, I think we're in that phase and we're living through it. But guess what? We're about to live through it in a different way because this program's not going to deliver either. And so there, look, a lot of this depends on conservatives. And here's the one tragedy of all this. I feel, I feel very strongly that we had a moment in 2010 in that Tea Party wave. And we had a window of time where we had the capacity to deliver. Now, we did not have the White House, and so we couldn't do the things that we necessarily wanted to do. But we had a moment where we could actually put some points on the board, at least by running things through Congress. And I think that moment passed us by. We need to get another moment like that. And I think we need to begin to build for that. And I think that's something that needs to come in the next 4 years.
What if you could kind of wave a magic wand and convince these Senate and House Republicans at the moment to do something over the next 9-10 months, in a way that might be consequential and help them for the midterms next year? What would you be advocating they put their attention on?
I give them advice on two things. One, I would say, get to work on the Reconciliation 2.0 bill.
Mm-hmm.
I would say go deeper on the pro-growth tax cuts, but find a way to wrangle into that bill significant and deep spending cuts so that you're not adding to the deficit. Okay. So that, because if we just go even more pro-growth tax cuts, you got to get the inflation under control. And the way to get inflation under control is to shrink the size and scope of the federal government. And then the second thing I would say, and I know they don't want to hear this, and this is the last thing that they want to do, but you have to pull back some of your Article 1 powers, especially on the tariffs. You have to do it. Yeah. And in the end, if you do that and find a way to effectively do that, and I know the politics is very tough, but if you find a way to do that effectively, you will actually increase Republicans' chances of keeping the presidency in 2028 and conservatives in keeping the House and the Senate going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And not just on tariffs and things. I mean, Congress has been abdicating way too many of its, on emergency powers. Also, by the way, maybe try actually writing some specific instructions into the bills you send along, and then doing that instead of just complaining about the bureaucrats who fill in all your blank spaces.
Yeah. Do your job, guys. Come on. You're not there to be potted plants or just cheerleaders for the administration. Every single one of you represent a district. Those people elected you have the voting card.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when senators and House members actually took that kind of seriously, their prerogatives.
Me too.
And the separation of powers. One last thing, just as we go here, because, and I do want to address this, sometimes we've got Republicans out there that have been happy to see and I agree with this, they think is a kind of healthy debate going on. You've also seen some criticism from some saying, all you guys are doing here is, you're sowing division, and you're taking attention away from the left, which really does have an anti-Semitism problem. You're making it easier for them to reimpose some of their progressive cultural orthodoxies on the country. I mean, where do you think the left is going with this whole debate too? Because, for as much as the Republicans are kind of rubbing up against it, it's really going on that side.
Yes, and it has been for a long time. I mean, you saw the left may have cost themselves a national election because they could not stomach the idea of putting a Jewish politician on the national ticket in the left. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. But again, I want the left to own that. We need to be better than the left. Okay. And so people say, oh, it's sowing, division on the right. Well, it's not. It's actually, if you're able to police your own on the right, you will have a broad enough coalition to beat the left. This stuff is not popular. The American people are still very good, and they see right through this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so if you want a winning coalition, you need to cut this cancer out before it ends up killing you.
Well, on those wise words, sage advice, optimistic note, we're going to call it there. Tim Chapman, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your thoughts with us this week. If you like the show, you can hit that subscribe button. If you'd like to write to us, you can at atkim@wsj.com.